Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first installment of the series titled The Gamification of War. This event is sponsored by the Carolina Public Humanities Center, which is designed to bring fun, interesting, and engaging conversations to audiences in and outside North Carolina. Before I introduce my guest for today, I wanted to briefly talk about the purpose of this series. War is a complex topic, both historically and currently. From the detrimental toll that it has on people and societies to understanding more mundane topics like tactics, strategy, operations, or campaigns, people must understand all facets of war and warfare. Therefore, two problems arise. The first is that young Americans today play an enormous amount of video games. Therefore, war-based video games have surpassed the news, movies, and even education when it comes to young Americans or people in general understanding the nuances of war. Video games have simplified war and turned a complex topic into fun, competitive entertainment. With the dwindling amount of jobs for military historians and the reluctance to have complex conversations about war at the primary and secondary education levels, educators have to grapple with the fact that this is how students learn military history and warfare currently. Should educators embrace this change? And if so, how do we embrace that change? This is our guided question for today, which leads me to introduce my special guest, John Regan. There's some brief information about John before we start. John is a U.S. Army veteran who has served in peacekeeping missions in what was once called Yugoslavia. He has also served in Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and several tours in Iraq in the early 2000s. Currently, he is a history instructor at Sandhills Community College in Pinehurst, North Carolina, as well as Richmond Community College in Hamlet, North Carolina. Welcome, John, and it's great to have you here today.
Hey, Matthew, great to be here.
Thank you. So I wanted to start off, I gave you a brief introduction there, but I wanted you to kind of talk more about your background, just beginning with your time/experience in the armed forces. And, if you can, just briefly talk about, what led you to teach after your military career.
Okay. Well, I joined the Army and, the Iowa National Guard when I was a junior in high school when I was 17. Attended basic training over the summer between my junior and senior year. Graduated high school, and I decided I wanted to go on active duty. And so I volunteered for that. And I got stationed in Bamberg, it was West Germany at the time. The Cold War was still going on. And once I got stationed there, and I was an infantryman. That was my MOS, 11 Bravo, when I joined. And shortly after I got there, the Desert Shield thing had been going on. And there was talk about drawing down the forces in Europe because, the Berlin Wall had just went down a few months prior to me getting there. And what do you know? It was on Thanksgiving 1990. We were just all told in formation that we were all going to be deploying to Saudi Arabia for Desert Shield, Desert Storm. So this was really a big deal because it was the first time forces in Europe had deployed to a combat theater. So we went there, we deployed on Christmas Eve that year. When I was there, I was in the 1st Armored Division. Mm-hmm. And we took part in the infamous Hail Mary, that's what Schwarzkopf called it, through Western Iraq. So we were there for the invasion and got back to Germany in that May. So we were gone about 6 months. Then I've been stationed in Colorado, went back to Germany. That's when I went to Macedonia in '93. And as an enlisted man, my career was going really great. And I was getting promoted fast. And I was going to night school then. We didn't have online schooling. You had to go truly at night. And so I had held every infantry position for, like I said, from rifleman all the way up to platoon sergeant, to include being a drill sergeant at the infantry school. Mm-hmm. And it had taken me 10 years to get an associate's degree. And at that time, I mean, I really wasn't set on making the Army a career, but the Army had been, good to me. But I was like, when you're looking at things, I was like, I don't want to have my bachelor's degree when I'm done. I was like, if it took me that long just to get a 2-year degree, I was like, there's no way I'm going to get this done. And so I left active duty to go to the Green to Gold program. I attended the University of Nebraska at Omaha and majored in history and got commissioned through ROTC at the University of Creighton University. Went right back on active duty. I was a distinguished military graduate. That means you're the top 10% of that commissioning class across the nation for that year. My primary branch was military intelligence, but I was branch detailed, meaning I had to serve 3 years in a combat arms branch. So I went into armor, tanks. I was a tank platoon leader and then later company executive officer. Once again, I was at Fort Riley. That's when we went to Iraq the first time in 2004. We're one of 2 tank companies, tank equipped companies in Baghdad. So needless to say, we were pretty busy. We worked in all the different districts and areas of that place. We were over there a year. Then I came back. And then shortly after that, I went to the transition course, meaning where I go to okay, now you need to go to learn to be an intelligence officer. And so then I transitioned to MI. And then immediately I went back to Iraq to be an advisor to a 800-man Iraqi National Police Battalion in Baghdad. Did that for 15 months, came back. Then I was stationed at Creighton University as a associate or assistant professor of military science. So besides teaching the ROTC classes, I also taught military history. That was open for everyone. After that assignment, I got sent here I got assigned to Fort Bragg at the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare School and Center. I was the Intel Doctrine writer for Special Warfare School. Did that, and then I was over and then I went to training group, and I was a commander over there in one of their advanced skills battalion. During that time, I got my Master of Arts, emphasis in American history. And when I got out of the Army, the best advice somebody said was, you got to figure out what you want when you go out because, there's a lot out there. And so I wanted to teach at the post-secondary level. And I knew that would take a while. And I was willing to wait it out because anyway, I got that opportunity to teach at both Sandhills and then later on Richmond. And then, why I wanted to get into education, especially at the post-secondary level, is, education. Sometimes it gets overhyped and sometimes it gets not given enough credit. It's just a matter of where you stand. But, I think it was, I wanted to continue to make an impact, before I was doing it more globally. But I wanted to have a direct impact right where I live. And so, being that example for the students, because really, being a college professor, it's not always just being the subject matter expert on that topic. You know, you're doing the same thing like when you train soldiers, you coach, train, and mentor them to be good all around students, to where they can take those principles they learn in your class and they can apply them to anyone, any other class, and be successful.
Mhm. Absolutely. And thank you for sharing definitely your experience, both in the military, but also outside. And I just had a quick follow-up question. You know, you started talking about education, but you also talked about how you specialize in both American history, but also teaching military history, having that background. Um, you know, in your opinion, why should civilians study or take courses in military history?
Well, in a normal survey course, like an American History 1 or a 2, a lot of times people who like new colleagues or stuff will say, "Oh, well, you were an Army guy, so you probably focus a lot on the military aspect of things." And I go, "No, this is a survey course, and there's a lot more to it than just that stuff." So that's where in a survey course, you're getting just a little bits of everything, and you're not able to tie the whole thing together.
Mhm.
Now, military history in particular, um, that those conflicts definitely shape the world we live in.
Mhm.
You know, regardless of where you're from, not only the world, the society, the culture, and it will also stereotypes come in. So that's where it helps to understand that. And the other thing is that the study of warfare is not just shoot them up and invade.
Yeah.
You need to understand it from the strategic, operational, and tactical level, the 3 levels.
Mhm.
Um, you know, because, you know, in the Army, they say, you know, amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics when
Mhm.
it comes to operations. So that's where studying militaries, it gives you another perspective. Because if you only focus on one aspect, you're not seeing it in a greater context when you're tying it to foreign policy
Yeah.
and the whys we're doing this. Because, you know, when warfare is when diplomacy fails. So you got to put it kind of all together to get a clear picture and understanding of what happened, why, and its effects.
Absolutely. And I like what you mentioned here about learning the totality of warfare. Um, so that brings me to my first sort of topic or section of topics that I have here, which is the notorious, I guess you could say, first person shooter type of warfare or war-based game. So things like Call of Duty, Battlefield. I feel like there's a debate right now of whether stuff like Fortnite kind of counts as a war-based or warfare-based video game where, you know, there's this sort of battle royale of every man for themselves almost. But these first-person shooters, I think, very much get to that tactical level. So my question to you is you know, a former infantryman, what are some of your thoughts about the portrayal of war slash warfare in these types of video games?
Um, it's unrealistic. You know, like you said, everybody thinks it's action packed and all that. Well, if you're playing the video game, you know, once the game starts, something's going to happen.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is to say that, you know, everybody's military experience is different.
Mm.
Um, but, you know, as an infantryman and being in combat arms and the special operations, um, there's probably about 80% of the time it's pretty boring, you know. And the other times it's high impact, high intensity. And you know, sometimes you can anticipate, okay, this is when things are going to get a little interesting.
Mm.
Um, then there's going to be times when all of a sudden your spidey senses, for lack of a better word, just start going off because you're noticing things kind of changing that can alert you. And then other times it's just out of the blue.
Mm.
So that's where in the video games, it over glamorizes it. And then there's you don't get all the other stuff with it. When you know the emotional fight or flight thing, you can't simulate that. You can't. The environmental conditions, the physical conditions. Like I said, it's entertainment is what it is.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very much entertainment. It's very much a commercialized, I guess, adaptation of war, and definitely, especially at the tactical level. And so this brings me to my next question of, have you ever played any first person shooters, or maybe, have you ever had kids, nieces, nephews, or students that have played first person shooters, and maybe they have explained to you, just like the gaming world or their experience? What's sort of your relationship to some of these things?
The only video first person shooter game I played, I don't even think they have it anymore. It was called Medal of Honor, and it was a World War II based computer game. I played that. That was years ago. And like it was more just a pastime. My daughters, they don't play those games. I have nieces or I have nephews that they play them, and students, and it's always fun to hear them come up and tell it, kind of explain the gaming world. And I was like, you're holding a controller, you're not holding a weapon, and you taking which shoulder do you put it in when you're coming around a corner, depending on which way, and just that stuff, and how they'll automatically reload for you, and just all of those things. And it's like, it's not real, man. It's not the same.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you make an interesting point, especially because, like you said earlier, it's not real, it's all entertainment. And I think it brings up this very interesting dynamic between reality versus commercialism, or entertainment information, or entertainment games, period. Because, at least the things that I've heard from developers is that, they try to make the game as realistic as possible, but they also want the video game, consumer to have fun. So it's very interesting to kind of see developers kind of juggle those two things together, this sort of realism versus fun or entertainment, which, gets me to my next question of realism versus entertainment. One of the things we talked about off camera was, obviously, you as a former veteran, or as a former active duty member, you all as military personnel go through simulations. So obviously, whether that's to simulate real battle time situations. One, I guess, can you speak a little bit more about sort of the purpose behind simulations? Maybe how those things traditionally go, and maybe even speak to the amount of realism that's kind of put into those simulations for military personnel.
Well, they're used for both individual tasks to hone those skills, and collective tasks, group tasks. So for like the individual ones, simulators, the electronic simulators, there's the ones you can use that are for marksmanship, to where you're shooting at a target on a range. You can do that, to work on your fundamentals, your breathing and your trigger control and all that. And then, when you're looking at collective tasks, you have ones that are like gunnery trainers, whether it's for a Bradley fighting vehicle or an M1 tank, to where you have the whole crew in there. So it's kind of real, but it's not. It's indoors, it's computerized, but that's to work on your crew coordination and sequencing of things when you're going to go to fire either gunnery, which you have to do every 6 months, because it's a lot cheaper to do it in a computer than to fire those rounds, it's a lot cheaper, as well as not to be operating the vehicles. And then, then you can also use them, those same type of simulators to do a more collective task, to where you can rehearse and do movements to contact, to where you actually go through the whole thing, the movement and whatever it is. And with those, to get the realism, we've done those in many ways. It's not just you hop in the simulator and then go, they hit the start button. You go through the whole sequence of developing your operations orders, you're doing your rehearsals, your back briefs, all that other stuff, just as you would if you were doing it for real. And then you get in the simulator and then you actually execute the mission, whatever that was. Now, once again, that's, in a building, there are computers, so they have to have a whole bunch of air conditioning. So it's kind of a comfortable environment. It's not the same. But then, we've done them before, to where we would go to the field and we'd be staying in the field, doing like we would normally do. And then instead of executing on the ground, then they bring you into the simulator and you do it in there. And that's kind of more realistic, because you have the effects of the environmental effects, the fatigue, if it was real hot out there or real cold, you're coming in, and so you're kind of able to simulate those effects on the body, the strain and that stress, as much as you possibly can. So yeah, and yeah, that's kind of like I said, you can use them for all things, and not just for, we use them not just for teaching individual tasks, but also there's driving simulators, from even driving a Humvee, driving a tank. They even have simulators you can use for parachutes. They put you in a harness and you sling it, and you have virtual glasses on. So you have to go through the whole things you normally would do to do it, but still, it's not the same as the real is doing it for real. And then there's call for fire simulators, where you're calling in indirect and close air support, and it's in a more of a virtual world. They can put you in any environment, whatever, and and how they simulate that is everything's timed, because, timing is critical. And also, when it comes to getting the coordination, not only within a crew or a team or a squad, but, when you have all the technology that supports this, the real stuff, it's all about timing and reaction. And it's really to get things to where you can do them almost out of muscle memory, to cut down the reaction time, to where it's muscle memory. You do it because you've done it so many times in a simulator, even though when you're doing it for real, it's not quite the same. But you're almost like, I don't want to say a robot, but you're doing it without thinking through it, because you've done it so many times.
Interesting. And it's interesting that you talk both about the technology component to, simulations in the military, but also the more active, I guess, as real as possible simulations that you all do as a group, or as in your squads or in your units, which is obviously very much different from video games. A follow-up question to that, though, is one of the biggest things, or one of the biggest game modes, I feel like, within first-person shooters at least, is the multiplayer component. But the question I have for you is, obviously, as a military personnel, you're obviously in your units, you're working with others. There's a very collaborative teamwork environment that you're a part of. Everyone basically does their job. Whereas in multiplayer, I mean, you can play with friends and you can kind of go out and dominate, your enemy, and et cetera, et cetera. Also, there seems to be no hierarchy in multiplayer. So there are no like squad leaders, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess what my question for you is, looking at the multiplayer functions of first-person shooters, um, and seeing how the rules are very much bent in those types of team-orientated games, you know, what do you think that might communicate to either young Americans or just video gamers in general? Or what might that be miscommunicating about, teamwork or more collaborative dynamics within the military itself, but that are being carried into these video games and expressed through multiplayer?
Well, it's, it's taking, like you kind of hit on it when you're taking the focus, you're putting the focus on the individual.
Mm-hmm.
Even though you're doing multiplayer, the focus is still on the individual rather than the collaborative, the collective, all of it. And, that I think in a way that's kind of how society is going. But, that's a video game. This isn't, if you're trying to apply that principle to warfare, yeah, it's an individual thing, all right, but it's the collaborative, it's the team
Mm-hmm.
that does it, and when you look at the hierarchy, it's the hierarchy's there, is it undervalues that in the game because of the leader, there are inherent responsibilities
Mm-hmm.
and training that gets that person to be in that position of whatever it is. And I don't think that gets appreciated, where it's like, okay, I can just show up and do this. And you're like, really? You can just show up and do this, and so I think that part, because it is an entertainment, that would turn a lot of people off from wanting, because it wouldn't be as fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I would definitely agree. But yeah, I think these components, and that actually leads me into my next question. Is, based on your experience as an infantryman, even with your experience of playing Medal of Honor or hearing about, nephews or students that play these games, I like to call this kind of like a what if segment. But if you had the opportunity to talk with a game developer and they were coming out with a new game about warfare or war in general, what would be some things that you would want them to emphasize less or emphasize more around this topic of war and warfare in general?
Obviously I'm not a big fan, and I kind of said, things, if you wanted to make it more realistic, you can't simulate those, to get that effect. You can't, you can have the sounds, you can have the graphics, but it's the other piece, that they can't simulate. Now, could they make them more graphic than what they are? Yeah, I'm sure they could, but why? Because once again, that's a big problem where, that's one of the downsides of it. Because, it's not real. So people don't make that connection.
Yeah.
When you see the effects of what you just did on a computer screen, or even if you see it on television or in a movie, that's different than when you're like, that person was just breathing 2 seconds ago, and you're right there, and once again, you can't simulate that no matter what type of graphic content you put in there. You can't do it. So yeah, that would, I mean, like I said, if you just want to make them realistic and all that, yeah, I could have things. I don't know how you could get them in there.
but it definitely feels as if like the violent dynamics are very overemphasized for these games. Um, which brings me, also to my sort of last question here, and just providing a little bit of context. According to an online poll from the Pew Research Center, American children younger than 18 make up 21% of gamers, while Americans between the ages of 18 and 34 make up 38% of the gaming population. When I look at these numbers, people are playing video games at an important stage of their educational development, anywhere from 10 to almost 35. That's a long time to play video games, especially if you're someone that plays a lot of war video games. So obviously, video games are shaping how students view and understand the past. So what do you believe, being a history teacher yourself, what do you believe is our job as educators in terms of trying to get students to basically, what's our role as educators in terms of either re-educating students about some of the concepts that they're engaging with in video games, or do you believe that do you believe that our job as educators, we should try to adopt or maybe adapt video games to our curriculum, maybe even our lectures? It doesn't even have to be a thing where we have students play video games, but do you see any benefits, I guess you can say, for our job as educators to try to maybe change the way we think about video games, or should we just kind of abandon them altogether?
I personally would never use one in the class because for that topic that we're discussing now, I don't see the educational benefit. You could at a certain point, but you'd have to take in the maturity level of your students, and then too their baseline understanding. And the only way I could see it being used is if you was to do it as like a capstone exercise, a thing at the end of the semester, to where they could apply or understand. But still, teaching history, it's going to be based on something that already happened.
Mhm.
So they're going to kind of know how it ends. It's not like they're going through the whole problem-solving sequence.
Mhm.
So, and it's not just video games, but everything is, with social media, to where all that's becoming shaping people's perceptions,
Mhm.
and people's perceptions become their realities.
Absolutely.
So it's to give them, I call them classic alternatives
Mhm.
to shape their perceptions. Rather, it's exposing them to, books, additional readings for your course,
Mhm.
to augment those, and to give both sides, a well-rounded approach
Mhm.
of viewing it. Or, I've done this a few times on different topics, is bring guest speakers in,
Mhm.
to where they, because you can't simulate it, but it's always interesting to hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Somebody who witnessed, whether it was somebody who grew up during the Great Depression, meaning that they were, not a baby, they were, in their teens or whatever, but where they can remember what it was like. Or, once again, if you bring a veteran in and talk to them, understand everybody's experience is different,
Yeah.
and so you kind of have to prep the class for that,
Mhm.
so you aren't asking, a B-52 bomber pilot what it was like to drive a Jeep. He didn't do it. You know what I mean? But they would assume. So, by exposing them to stuff, information and people that in a more virtual world, they never would interact with.
Mhm.
But where, as an educator, you can facilitate that. Like I said, bring them in, because otherwise both sides would have never talked to each other. Then, even in the store, they just pass. So if you just, if you have them there, and to allow that exchange, it always surprises me how, between having guest speakers in class or having additional readings, students, they tend to like those, and I get it, because a lot of times those additional readings are more exciting than the textbook, but I think there's ways that we can augment their understanding, rather than just allowing it to just do in this virtual entertainment.
So before we wrap up here, as I mentioned, in the beginning of this question, young Americans, younger than 18 making up 21% of gamers, whereas those between 18 and 34 make up 38%. So I think that's roughly 59% of gamers that are basically younger than 35. So what's sort of your opinion when you hear these numbers, and you hear about how these people are kind of playing video games? And this isn't necessarily the numbers that reflect how many play war games, but 59% is still a lot of people. So what are some of your opinions when you kind of hear these statistical numbers? And yeah.
Well, like you said, with this, it's not just playing those games. I think it's a sign of the world we live in. Technology is taking over. As an educator, you got to embrace technology, but you can't let it dominate it. That ability to critical think and analyze and all that, machines can't do that. That's a people thing. And so, but you have to leverage it to engage with the younger population, and you get technology, and you get the human brain working together. It's magical, but you make life easier, that's for sure. But I think that's where, as educators and leaders in the community side, we have to kind of be aware that those are shaping elements in our society, and you can't just blow it off, because it's not going anywhere. So you got to kind of blend the two together. You got to embrace it, and then when it is coming to these video games, like if I have students say something about, oh, did this, then you got to be okay. There's reality, and then there's entertainment, bridging that gap.
But I wanted to end it there. For anybody that's tuning in, John will be with us in the larger panel. So definitely, if you have any questions from this video, please feel free to bring those to the larger panel and get a chance to interact with John and ask him more about either his expertise or more of his thoughts about video games. John, I also wanted to thank you for being here. Thank you for going through these questions with me. And I hope the audience definitely gained a lot from this conversation. So thank you.
Oh, thanks for having me.